they'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Loan you that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Program to crave the basics, keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid, you're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of all nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogue Ways, we welcome an esteemed doctor, researcher, publisher, author, founder, and thinker who has written about our modern infatuation with fear, how it has saturated our entire society and become a central facet of control, and how we can solve the problem. He is the fearless Dr. Michael Fisher. Dr. Michael, welcome to Rogue Ways, and how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very good. I don't know if I'll have any out-of-the-pocket solutions to our fear problem on this planet, but I will certainly give it a shot.
You've at least got more than many of us have, having thought about it so long. So I'll be happy to hear some. And I want to thank all the listeners and viewers out there who subscribe to Rockfin, Apple Podcasts, or rogueways.substack.com, who grab my books on rogueways.org, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Audible, who book one-on-one health, healing, and support sessions with me, or who check out the courses I offer on rogueways.thinkific.com. You are all deeply appreciated and loved, and you are the best. So thank you so much for all of you for being here and being you. And Michael, I have a pointless question of the episode. It's not always all that pointless. This one definitely isn't, but I wanted to get your perspective on this. How do you bring more presence and mindfulness to your daily experience?
Yeah, well, just before coming on this podcast, I sat down and thought, okay, well, ready to go here, but I can feel all those kinds of feelings of anxiety, anxiousness, whatever, the unknowns, right? All that is, in fact, a real unknown, speaking with you in an audience live. And so I will just sit down and get my ginger tea or something, and I'll start with that. So something hot or warm, and sitting down and being quiet. And then I would pick up my eagle feather, which I found on a hiking trip, and it felt very meaningful. So that becomes a kind of a symbol for a kind of different perspective. It's not just a human perspective. So I'm a bit of a nature nut that way. And that's kind of my foundation into trying to understand humans, is not by trying to understand humans directly, but through nature, and then trying to come to understand humans, especially we're such cultural beings, we're symbolic makers. And that creates such a huge different dimension on this planet and in the cosmos, really.
Yeah, I love that perspective too, when you start looking at people as, like humans, as their own species in this planet, right? Like, try as much as you can to not be one of them for a second, and then just look. And that kind of opens up a whole lot of doorways too. And maybe that's part of that, viewing it from nature. Is that sort of similar to you?
Very, very important to have. I think I start the whole idea of fear studies, certainly as a discipline. Not everybody's going to be into that discipline and do what I've done in terms of systematic research on fear from many, many perspectives. But it is a kind of trans perspective. It's a kind of post-humanist perspective in a way, and it's holistic. It's an integral perspective. And so I think very similar to some of the Eastern traditions, right, of various practices of really getting beyond this human-centered, ego-centered, I'm afraid I'm going to die and I want to stay here forever. How can I do that? No matter what I destroy, I'll just, so you can hear fear being such a key motivator. So my first thought was, don't really just study humans in their fear as a basis of motivation. Why don't you study creatures that are not human? And see how they motivate themselves in the world. And so without, of course, the danger being humans can then project, oh, I understand nature. Oh, I understand why that deer's running from that cougar. Well, whoa. And then I say, well, okay, be very careful. You're not projecting, right? Fear projecting what you think a deer is going through, how they understand what's going on, and even what a cougar is going on and understanding. So we get into this problem of being a human species, and you're right. At the same time, I'm trying to walk a bow-legged. I'm trying to walk in another world at the same time. It's very important
Yeah.
to my work.
What are those various perspectives that you have looked at, fear through the lens of?
I'll start with just one of the latest ones I find most exciting. It's not that it, wasn't always there in my research. Probably 35 years almost of looking at fear systematically and wanting to know everything I could about it. One of the most recent one is really posthumanism, the critique from posthumanist perspective, and there's many different authors articulating that, certainly in scholarly circles. It's really coming back to an understanding of animism. I think not animism looked at from, say, a traditional Middle Eastern traditional religion, classical kind of religion, but animism from the perspective of people who practiced animism for thousands and millions of years. In other words, we would call maybe indigenous peoples and their relationship to nature. And when I say nature, I say from clouds to dust to water to their relational perspective. So another way of looking at animism, which is basically everything has life. Everything is a living being. This artificial distinction, right, that modern science has said, well, that's living, this is non-living, and that's how we're going to define it. So you can see the counter here, the counter or the rogue perspective on science and its domination of reality, right? Which would have a domination on what we think fear is and how to manage it. So I want to quickly slip out. And so that's been one of the most exciting. And so studying people like from an Afrocentric perspective, for example, I've really been appreciating Bayo Akomolafi's work, Nigerian, ex-Christian, dropped it all his life, and then went into Yoruba tradition and one of the ancient religions out of Africa. And this Afrocentric Black perspective. And when he says Black, he doesn't mean identitarian Black. He says just Blackness. The whole notion of how does a human or any organism live in a good relation to Blackness. So, typically in the West, I'm stereotyping, but in the typical West sort of modern world, we're a light culture. We're always putting the lights on, and you can just see the lights in our cities and everything. So we have not a great relationship with darkness.
Yeah.
That way. And that probably spills out in racism and colorism and all those problems of oppressive regimes of all kinds, official and non-official, that we all live with. And I certainly know myself, when I comes to the dark, I'm fine walking through a forest. Once it gets dark, I'm starting to look for, okay, well, where do I settle for the night? I still don't have a full comfort in darkness walking in a forest. There's good reasons for that biologically, but there's a lot of cultural inheritance. There's this kind of religious inheritance. So animism and this post-humanist perspective really says, well, why don't you look at other creatures for answers on how they manage fear? Maybe there's great teachers. So animism to me, look for teachers everywhere. Everything is a teacher. What a great, learning perspective or paradigm.
Well, I think I might accidentally be an atomist because I do feel like everything is alive and everything has its own soul and its own intelligence and what it wants to do and what it wants to be in the world and, its own desires. And I also look at everything as a teacher, ideally. I'm not saying I'm like perfect at this or that it's constantly at the front of my mind, but I am always looking to anything, a cloud, a TV screen, or a dog, as my possible
teacher. How would you have gotten that? I'm curious, Lindsey, what would have maybe made you move in that direction? It's certainly not the traditional way you would have been brought up, I would guess.
Definitely not. I honestly feel like this is part of my own spiritual path and gifts, maybe, is that I just found myself constantly interacting with everything as though it had something to tell me and was telling it to me. And so I think some people call that, being psychic in some way. And sure. I think it's just sort of being really observant, but it doesn't really matter the label you put on it. It was just sort of something that I experienced. And so I just know the world in that way. I didn't.
A powerful implication when you just think just off the surface of it anyway, it's a much more complex conversation, would be that if I see everything as a teacher, already, you see, I've invoked a really sincere, oh my, okay, I need to listen.
Yeah.
Instead of stomp around and tell other people how to listen to me.
Right. In fact, I find myself, and maybe you do too, getting kind of almost surprised or shocked and sometimes worried that people don't ask questions of almost anything, and they just sort of they begin with projection. You are this, that is that, that is this, and this is just how it is. And I'm like, you're not curious about any of that? Like, it doesn't tickle your fancy to just maybe think like, I'm not actually sure what, let me find out more about it.
So science, and then certainly philosophy of the Western world, again, I'm generalizing in general, but certainly they would definitely tend toward this categorizationalism, and a kind of fixation and obsession with the categories. And once you are able to control the categories of existence, right, by naming things so directly, and then you're always naming them as I'm the observer over here, I'm the namer, and I will, put the names on. And of course, I might get that from a dictionary, I might get it from a tradition, somebody's taught me that. And one of the things I find about these more animistic religions, or even, what we're maybe call pre-Christian, we'll just call it, or pre-Arab, Abrahamic religions that I enjoy the most, is they see every relationship is not a category, you're over here and they're over there. I love the just simple notion, a very ethical one, is they are my ancestors.
I love that.
The stones, right? The dirt, the soil, every creature is not just a teacher. And so it's not an abstract notion. Oh, I learned from everything. I learned from all. No, it's like, no, seriously, they are your ancestors. They are here and were here before you. So Western philosophy didn't start on it. It started that I'm my mind, I think, therefore I am. We think of Descartes' famous, phrase or dictum. And then once you start from that, we always feel like we're looking out onto the world. And therefore we create all the relations. No, the relations were already created. Homo sapien, we come out of those relations. We are just the new babes on the scene, so to speak. So you can hear we're doing like a different time spatial relationship here in this kind of thinking of animism or these new perspectives. And so then the question becomes this, well, how does that actually influence our fear and the way we manage fear? Let's just say as humans, you called this the pandemic of fear we're living in. Why'd you call it this show? I mean, the pandemic.
Because I think if we did have any kind of an actual pandemic, it is just fear. There's no other pandemic I've noticed so far.
Okay, yeah, that's a strong statement. And of course, we have to then nuance. Okay, so what do we mean by fear, right? That's always going to enter a conversation. And I can just tell you what I just exchanged with you right now is extremely 0.0000001% of the population would have a dialogue in fear the way we started.
Yeah.
Because what I have found in 30 plus years of researching, as soon as I bring up the topic fear, people start talking, oh, you mean fear, blah, blah, blah. And oh, I have fears of da, da, da. And all of a sudden, and it's like, I'm going, whoa, you just like you filled the entire field of curiosity with what you think you already know.
Yeah.
And it's so common. I see it, like I said, that minute minutia of somebody to say, well, what do you mean by fear? Can you imagine that in a human conversation to human? And if I said the same thing, and the topic was sex, and I said, well, what do you mean by sex? What do you mean by sexuality? And I so now use the analogy, I would like to have conversations, and today might be one chance to just touch surfaces with you, is what is fearuality?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, fear is now shifted. Just like if we were to talk about sex, well, what about sexuality? And then you go, what about sexual development? See, once you make it sexual or moral or whatever it might be, you just expand the terrain. So I like to think, and I've been playing with that, having to create a new vocabulary is really a key part of doing fear studies, and not just fear studies in a scholarly way, but my own searching as a human being to understand, so I don't get people filling the field with what they think they already know, and therefore, where's the new exploration here, right? So it's like, how can we even get out of those boxes? And that's what the rogue, that's what the rebel, that's what the trickster does. Oh, you got your categories. Oh, you already think you know. Oh, and you think you're the top of the chain, etc. Right? So
Right.
all of that you can hear is I'm a deep, deep methodologist. So I come to the notion of fear as a methodologist. And that's very different than coming to the fear as in a psychological knowing. So then I can manipulate my fear either in me, call it fear management, or I can manipulate that fear in another, because now I have ways to control certain behaviors in other humans and myself, right? So I always got the control, domination, modality. You hear it's like the paradigm of operation already on fear. So it's my quick little hypothesis. It's already modulated in a dominant worldview, not like I'd say in contrast to say an indigenous worldview. And I'm talking about a pan-indigenous worldview here, a very strong universal worldview. There's obviously so many different kinds of indigeneity on this planet, and all to be respected for their universals, but also their localities and their specialties. So I have been influenced by some very powerful indigenous teachers. I've mentioned Biokumulafi, Four Arrows, Dr. John Jacobs teaches at Fielding Graduate University, and he's a leadership program there. And he's been a great mentor. I've written a book on him and his biography and his 40 years of work exploring fear from an indigenous perspective. And that was just a great conversation I had with him over several years of completing that book. It's called Fearless Engagement of Four Arrows. That's his indigenous name. But he's also a white guy. He has a white history and background. He's mixed blood and so on.
What would you say is the, if we have this sort of built-in, cooked-in factor of fear and it is part of our control system in our society, what would you say is the main difference between us and what we used to be when we were all indigenous to somewhere?
And let's go back to even creatures, before the Homo line. So I spent my time as a youth, as a young person, pretty pissed off with humanity. By the time I'm going to come out of the late 60s into the 70s, I'm taking ecology courses. I'm reading the stuff, and I'm going, we are fucked. Like,
Yeah.
we are the only species that destroys our own nest so systematically, and not only systematically, we wipe out so many other creatures in the process and pollute environment. I just how do you understand that as a 15, 16-year-old, right? And I had to try to make sense of it. And so you get some, but where I turn to in an automatic kind of way, and there's autobiographical reasons for that. I was a fisherman, and my dad took us out to nature and the streams, and we went fishing ever since I could toddle. And so he taught us a respect for our prey, right? Like, to catch fish, you have to be smart. You can't just go out and think you're going to catch them, and then you respect them. And if they're too small, you let them go. They're not ready to be caught. I learned all of this without an educated so-called, ecology background, and my parents didn't know anything about that word. So it was I think that's where nature became the most interesting creature. And to summarize it in a nutshell, my experience of watching nature very carefully, and you sit there fishing because most of the time you're not catching anything, and you have to look around. So you sit quietly and you look around, and the quieter you are, you see more. Okay, so now the neighbors in the forest, and you just notice all the connections. You notice they start coming closer to you. Well, what I noticed is watching them is I did not ever see them, and I'm going to say this just for controversial, but it's actually something I would argue about. They do not operate in fear. They access fear, but do not operate in it as a primary motivator. Oh, but aren't they just trying to survive all the time? They're always looking around, looking to survive. Another indigenous teacher, Tyson Yunkaporta, has been speaking from an Australian Aborigines perspective, and he studied that. Some of his books are very interesting, and he says, That's just such a Western notion that creatures are out there wandering around in fear. And you think they have tons of predators, like, yeah, fish, like predators from below, predators from above. Never mind the human fishermen. It's like, and you go, okay, well, what do they live? Where are they living? And I said, well, one of the things that they do is, they know how to escape. So all that, flight, fight stuff is valuable to a point of reality and understanding, but they don't stay in that fear. As soon as they've like moved out of it, they're like back in, looking for cool stuff, looking for mates or whatever it might be. And they're not holding this pattern. So one of the ways I had to make that distinction between humans and, I'll just say, the creatures, the other beings on this planet, generalizing horribly, is that they do not stay in a fear state. Not for very long. And in fact, the entire evolutionary system, arguably, physiologically, genetically, and historically, has been, don't hang out in a fear state. Not good. Too many bad chemicals go in you, deteriorates your cells, wrecks your blood system, circulatory system. So we could go on and on. They know this, and I called that defense intelligence. And so how do I explain then the human phenomena, right? Culture. And the word, I've come up with a couple concepts. Culturally modified fear, right? The playoff of genetically modified systems. Now you're dealing with a whole other beast, so to speak. Not to make beast negative.
Right. The dark isn't negative. The beasts aren't negative.
Yeah.
These are just really modern things, just like this living in fear. And I would say we are born in fear and we were bred in fear, and our ancestors for how many generations now have also been the same. But I don't think it was always that way. And now we're so overdosed on fear and saturated with fear. I don't even know if we really understand or notice anymore, but it's really easy for us to then just start getting mindless. Like we get taken out of our ability to be in any sort of presence or higher mind by this fear, especially because it's so established within us, that PTSD sort of like behavior where you have this so frequently or so deeply that you just can get triggered right back into it without thinking and seemingly without being able to control it. And animals aren't like that. And it is so interesting that we project that onto them. I've seen all these videos that I love of animals who don't know each other and are wild. They're not domesticated, and they're going to help each other out of sticky situations. Sometimes they're even supposedly natural enemies, and they're still helping each other sometimes. Not all the time, right? Sometimes they're also killing each other, but that's a different thing, right? This ability to go and have some sort of compassion or understanding and help a creature that isn't your own and isn't you. I don't think you can be in a constant state of fear and do that as an animal. I don't know. We see it all so strangely, and it's very much from our culturally modified fear situation, obviously.
So I use it just a simple in my writing and teaching. Sometimes I'll just go fear clicks with the little scare marks. Fear. And I you see, I have to talk schizoidal here. I have to talk about fear so people can understand me. That means I have to talk the language of the society or the people around me. So I'll just talk about fear and try to create a conversation. But at some point, if they're interested, if they're curious and they want to know more, then I go, we have to now also talk about fear. And that's the culturally modified version. And that is, as you say, has been taught to us, has been bred in us, mostly, I would argue, from post-traumatic effects and traumas. Not just all human-to-human traumas, but sometimes traumas that came from volcanoes and massive earthquakes and floods and weather that traumatized certain cultures more often and faster than they could heal. Sadly. But that is probably a reality if you're in a bad situation or environment where hit once, get hit again, and you got a cascading more trauma than that culture has. They do have natural healing mechanisms. We all do, biologically and culturally. We have rituals for healing. This is part of the human wonderful side of culture. It knows how to regulate, how to get back to that intelligence, right? Or that higher mind, as you would say, too, because that's important. when you want to connect with the world you live in. But there are real situations, or it could be a wars and so on. So it's not like it all started with, humans, but we're susceptible, is the way I come to understand of it, rather than we're a bunch of assholes. I could go there. I can definitely go there. Not a problem. But I have to then learn, well, what is a compassionate, not just a compassionate because I want to be a nice guy towards my species. It's that I also study. So I look at what is the effect. How does trauma set in? Well, it sets in because you're overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed in one way or another by environmental conditions. And if you get enough of those hits, right, we now call them stressors. We call them, I forget the name, but it's called, kind of the worst cascading of crises, ACEs, and I can't even remember what that means right now. Have you heard of ACEs? Psychologists using it? Yeah.
Yes. I have a very high ACEs score.
Yeah, I do too.
And so did all my favorite students.
I do too. And so no, we can move into that part of the conversation. As I've been studying fear for a long time, but I've been practicing and healing through the effects of toxic fear, culturally modified fear, and a lot of misinformation, not only that was given to me, but that I, in my traumaticized state, would misinterpret information.
Yeah.
And that's one of the realities. And sadly, that makes us extremely vulnerable. We have such a powerful mind, brain system in humans that other creatures are not so susceptible to that, where we can create this really interior misinterpretation of data, from somatic data to data from others, from what we read, when we're already in an excess fear conditioned space. And my friend Four Arrows that I mentioned earlier, he says, well, that's the hypnotic state. You've already been ignited in a way. You've been your system's brought up into a heightened state when there's a fear experience that goes on. You can also get in a heightened state through concentration practices. You can get into a heightened state through music and dance and ecstatic. The heightened state, he says, is an amazing state. You're a maximum learner in the heightened state. But when the heightened state is accompanied by a fear impinging and threatening situation at the same time, he calls it a heightened fear state combination. That's the fundamental, most powerful for hypnotizing someone.
This is, listeners and maybe yourself as well will think immediately of MK Ultra and these other sorts of programs that were intentionally inducing deep fear states in order to, access that level of mind and manipulate and control and brainwash people. And I've also seen throughout history, this seems to be a tactic, especially of, rulers, people who have the knowledge that you can do this to another person and also have the means by which to make that happen to people in order to create really deep loyalty, right? People who have messages that can't be kind of unwritten that they can carry somewhere else. There's a lot of practical reasons that I would not agree with morally, but that exist. And people have been using this. So that's another interesting side of this, that heightened state and that extreme learning state being used intentionally for these reasons, not just always accidentally. And then we learn, these negative patterns that are destructive and become more and more toxic. I guess they both probably do, but, one's intentional, one's maybe not.
Yeah. And then we got to sort of another level. I come back, okay, what can we learn from that? What we can learn? And Four Arrows would say is, well, the hypnotic state can go either way. You can be in that heightened state of optimum learning and you can turn toward fear and you can see it as the enemy, the threat, and you can turn toward fear and say, oh, I also know fear. Why? Why do I know? Because when I wasn't in a heightened state, I was learning how to manage and control fear and connect with fear from the creatures, the animals, the stones. Oh, how is that? How is that? Well, you're related to them. They're your ancestors. Oh, wow. They're like an encyclopedia of fear management for you. And I just love that way of thinking. It's so different than that kind of Western individualism. I've got to figure it out. I've got to know. I got to be in control. And it's always the danger of, when individualism goes rogue.
Yeah. What do you think the best lessons are from our ancestors about how to deal with or manage fear or understand fear?
Well, I did a project, very practical now. I'm an artist, and I did an artist residency at a daycare center just this last 2 years ago. And I was trying to think of an art material I could bring into this daycare center of these young 3 to 5 year olds. They're our future, like they're going to be the citizens, and so I care a lot about it, and I'm an educator as well. So, I dumped a half a load of gravel from a dump truck, did a ritual, and really made it a sacred ceremony. And the children watched this with their teachers and their parents, and this huge gravel coming down. And then what I did immediately is when the stones were down, the dust settles. Of course, the kids are just ready to go charging up the hill, and I knew that would happen, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to contradict and challenge that pattern of dominating the material. So using this, again, gravel that they drive their cars and trucks on, it's on all the the people's driveways around here. So it's the natural stone, and it's a blown up mountain. This is the mountains that are actually surrounding where we live here in the 9-1 West Coast. So what I did is just a very simple ritual. I brought out a red, huge, soft blanket, and I had a couple adults just cover the stones immediately once they were down. And that red blanket, and what's the story, right? What I tell you, I said, these are the stones, peoples. They have come a long way, and they want some quiet time before they're ready to let people play with them or take them away or whatever. And then I gave them all these little survivor flags with yellow and pink and the plastic, and you stick the little, the wire into the ground, the surveyors markers. I said, let's make a ring of protection for the stones in this cover state. So what I got after studying stones for 2 years as an artist, working with different interactions with different peoples with them, is I come away with a takeaway that at some point I had this huge insight that, wow, stones don't have to worry about being living beings. Quote, in other words, they are not near as vulnerable as we are. And they are crystals in a way. You start going back and you start thinking crystals, and you start thinking they are an organization that didn't need to breathe and do all the things that we do as living beings. So you come to respect that let's call it the inorganic world. Animists wouldn't like that. But from a scientific point of view, let's call it inorganic, that what great masters of fear they are, because they don't have that vulnerability as soon as you start being a living organism. And we're just very sensitive as living organisms to collapse of that cell, and you're out. And the crystals, throw anything at me, fire, water, bury me under the earth. And so you start to go, and then when you start to build this relationship, as I was animistically, right, you can hear the invocation. And I'm using a trance-based approach to learning for those children. I'm using this manipulation, if you want to call it that, in a conscious, sensitive and ethical way to help children see that these stones can be great teachers for you to calm yourself, to regulate yourself, because they don't have to worry about living.
Yeah.
They don't have a fear of death.
Yeah. I always feel like the stones are, I think of grounding, obviously, we get to just release, right? And I just want to go out and hug a stone and lay on it. And this is the most comforting feeling, because you just don't, it's kind of like what you're talking about, you don't have to care. You don't have to worry about anything right now. You can just be here, not moving, doesn't matter. Nothing's going to change suddenly. Just let go fully. And that's how I feel with that stone energy. And I love that. I seek that out. I want that all the time. Probably because this world is so crazy.
Yeah. So when just even to pick up on that word crazy, it's a good word for a lot of reasons, but just as a metaphor, it has all kinds of, potentials of what it creates, when we label something crazy. And then what does that do to us when we're labeling something crazy? Well, that becomes an interesting point for reflection, philosophically, psychologically, spiritually, whatever, even biologically. And I start to think of, well, we probably name it crazy. And I'm just going to generalize again from my own perspective. That's many perspectives. What's my own perspective? It's really basically saying that crazy means it's unpredictable more than I like. That unpredictability is going to be de-attaching, de-bonding, separating. I don't think we label something crazy if it wasn't a threat to us. I think we're fairly accurate on a certain level of that. That can be hyperbolic or not, and maybe not so accurate. But generally, just fundamentally, they are crazy. I cannot bond and feel safe. I can bond with them and know that I will be received, cared for. So care is fundamental. And that's what I was trying to do with the stones in that project artistically. And I'm not saying it worked. I just do it because it seems like that's what I want to do. And I cared for the stones immediately that they were delivered. They have been released from and cut off from and blown up from their mother. They are like now the aliens. They are now like the immigrants. They are strangers in their own land. So we were just doing this ritual, and I think the children at some deep level, so I trust there's something in human nature that knows we have to stay connected. We have to stay bonded. And so if we had parents who were not good, let's just say, bless their hearts, under all the conditions they had to deal with, their experience, their knowledge, their lack of healing, whatever it might be, that they were not able often to keep a continuity of that bond, that connectedness. So we call it attachment, right? Attachment theory. There's other kinds of ways. But the animistic perspective knows that too. Well, you are connected, but then sometimes you don't feel connected. And that's where you have to do ritual. That's where we do rituals. Why? We take our shoes off. We go on the ground. We hug a stone. What are you doing? You're attaching.
Yeah.
To something, what would in the indigenous traditions, some of the people are saying that's the greater than human. Mm-hmm. It's not the other than human. It's the greater than human. They are our ancient ancestors. So once you start invoking and making those attachments, so you can hear I'm talking really about a fear management practice here. In practical terms, make attachments. Oh, yes. Not to nicotine, not to caffeine, not to alcohol, not to, unless you want to practice those, let's call them psychedelic substances of all kinds, consciously. I actually want to know what caffeine is. I want to know what nicotine is. It comes from plant sources, a lot of it, or mimicking of plant sources. So especially if you go to the natural plant sources as something you want to try, to calm you down or whatever you might be trying, I always say go as a friend. Go as they are your neighbor. Not, I need that to get calm. Yeah. I need that. And that's what those children would have done automatically because they are hyper. They're anxious beings. Are you kidding? Living in a post-pandemic world, that's when I started the installation, right? Right in the middle, these children seeing people with masks on every day. Yeah. I'll talk about detachments, right?
Trauma, yeah.
As a social species, so any kind of way to attach. And so I was trying to get them basically to bond with these stuff.
Yeah. I also feel like there's a lot of empowerment there. They're like, these are beings that need my help, and I get to help protect them with this circle. And now you have this honor of yourself as well as, a powerful creature that gets to decide and choose and offer and give and receive, not just react, right?
That's right. Not just react impulsively, which we were very, susceptible to.
Yes, I know I am definitely that way too. I want to go all the way back for a second. This may seem unrelated, so forgive me, but we're talking about animism, and we were talking about the dark at first, and like this fear that the darkness seems to hold, especially in this culture. And I was thinking, well, the darkness is therefore a being or a consciousness or alive as well, and also then has something to teach us. And just even this perspective for people who have that fear of the dark or have that reaction to the dark could be like the thing that allows them to engage with it instead of reacting to it. Just the idea that, like, is it alive? Can I talk to the darkness? Can I say, hey, darkness, how are you? What are you doing tonight? Right?
Oh, isn't it? It's not about who's in the darkness.
Right. It's just
you're making a nice distinction there, right? You can hear it. Oh, it's not about who's in it, the other. Oh, it's actually just about the darkness.
Yeah.
Whoa, you just like released all the horror stories, all the films you've just watched of horrors, read novels of the horror in the dark. I mean, you can just see you have to depopulate. So I'm giving you another management strategy. Right? And they're just from a weird world. I don't know where this comes from, but it's just, you have to depopulate really everything. I have to depopulate fear, the concept of it, to be really, I think, a good researcher. A researcher who really drills, a researcher who's really holistic and integral, a researcher who's not afraid of the highest spiritual to the lowest material. That's a spectrum of knowing. And so just depopulating of images, memories, symbols, the symbolic quality of what fear is, or the dark. So we could put dark and fear together, and they're like this. You can't talk about fear without talking about dark. You can't talk about dark without talking about fear. They are enmeshed.
And the third word maybe would be, like you said, that just unknown.
Yeah.
Right?
It's fundamental, I think, certainly the unknown. But I think that is so hard to grasp. What is unknown? It's so hard to grasp. I mean, I love the analogy that I'll hear from Bayo Komalafi. He'll say, well, just realize, just once the moment you go like just below your lip and go inside, do you know what's living there? The numbers of creatures. Do you know you have more bacteria cells in your body than you do have your own cells?
Yeah, that's wild.
And then you sort of go, oh, who am I?
What am I?
And they're all working. And the fungal, it just, this new understanding. This is the post-humanist, right, individualist understanding. We're breaking out of this long, long legacy of modernity, Western Enlightenment philosophies, and so on. And with that, all the trauma that went with those philosophies. Arguably, a lot of those philosophies, including Descartes, René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. When you look at his biography, he was a traumatized individual. He lost his mother when he was like a little babe. It was a really rough, lot of wars around at the time. What's he looking for? Can I live anywhere that's not emotional?
Yeah.
I think, therefore I am, right? Not think, therefore what I feel. No. Let's get away from that crazy world. And it's crazy. He saw a crazy world. Humans see it. But we just don't know often what the alternative is. So we're looking at these strategies that often are about dissociating from it. We cut it off. We suppress it. And that's all fear patterning in a not healthy form.
Yeah. And that disconnection, is really at the root, I would say, of most disease as well. No matter how we cut it, there's some level of, even if it's purely psychological in a lot of, ways, or emotional, but also just like, we don't know, we're so disconnected from the natural ways of eating that when we eat like this bag of chips or whatever, we don't even understand, like, what is the nutrition in this? What is this even made of? Is this food? Like, I don't even know I don't know where it came from. I have no connection to this thing at all. all of these things, and maybe disease itself is really just a state of disconnection from various
Yeah.
directions, right? All accumulating over time.
I'm
I
just
really
thinking,
emphasize the reconnection of whatever we can to each other, to nature, to ourselves, because we've just been pushed away.
I was just thinking of cigarette packages when, we sort of turned against the smoking more or less, not totally. And I was thinking about the way that the companies tried to deal and the governments tried to deal with, this, you shouldn't smoke this. This is like bad. There's research that shows all fear-based, right? What's called fear appeal advertising. Governments use it, corporations use it for all kinds of ends. But that fear-based was always this is what will happen to you if you smoke. And I was just thinking how different it would be if we just said, here's this product, get to know what nicotine is.
Yeah.
We put that as the label. Not fear invoking. Get to know what nicotine is. You're choosing this, and then it just says reminder. What's the reminder, right? From this so-called responsible government or whoever the authorities of health are, the Surgeon General, and just put get to know what nicotine is. Well, that would be my strategy for what I'd call a fearlessness approach.
Curiosity.
You will get to more or less the same ends rather than using the fear-based approach. So just it came up as an idea when we talk about reconnecting. If you're using some substance or any, where it's these, you say, high carb foods, ultimately you're using it to disconnect from a lot of feelings, unpleasant. I know it in myself. We all have this addictive patterning, and that's why I called it addictive patterning, fear patterning. So now we have darkness, now we have addictions, then we have trauma, and fear is just circling in the middle related to all of those.
Yeah.
So what is fear? Well, fear is you better study that, you better know something about that, you better know something about that. It's a big circle.
It is a really big circle. And so the fear ultimately, like all fears, I would say, right, are ultimately the fear of death, which is always fascinating to me. If that's true, it seems true to me. Why would you be afraid of anything otherwise, unless it was going to lead towards your death or suffering, which is, I guess, maybe a form of death. But the one thing you know for sure in life is that you will suffer and you will die. Like those are the two things I would say for sure. There's going to be some level of suffering and there's going to be death. So why do we fear anyway the things that we know for sure exist and are going to happen and have been happening to all our ancestors forever?
Well, it's a great question. Why do we? I mean, philosophers and psychologists, sociologists have been trying to answer this, religious theologians and so on. I love it. I love how hard humans are trying to understand fear. And I have a very powerful paradigm that I was lucky enough to come across in the early 80s. And it was an understanding of, without going into all the details of the practice of it, it was based on peer counseling, how we come with another human being. Grassroots movement. This is not led by psychologists. It's how do humans come together to help each other really emancipate. We call it freedom. You can call it liberation. And I was lucky enough, 40 plus years ago, to come into a practice with a small community of people doing this practice. And one of the things that you come to realize really quickly is, why do humans have all that fear that you just described so nicely? And one of the ways to get to it is, I don't think it is about fear of death. I think it's about the fear of being hurt and not knowing how to heal.
I love
that. That will really do you in.
Yeah.
Because it's damn hard enough to get hurt. Ouch! The world hurts, and things and people hurt you. And sadly, the people most close to you tend to hurt you the most. Sorry, social species. we're very connected. We're very vulnerable as young children. Sorry, because we can't go run and jump like a bird after after 24 hours. We need years and years to just get independent. So all that vulnerability, and then you get hurt. And then you've got a culture now called a coping culture, not a healing culture. So this is, again, the move from indigenous to let's just call it more non-indigenous type cultures, where they lose the memory of how to heal. And they lose it because they've learned, when you start losing the memory, it's kind of like a parallel as you're losing memory of how to heal. Maybe because the culture, for lots of reasons, is getting dissociated. As I said, cascading traumas will do that. You'll start to dissociate, hard to find yourself again. That's a schizoidal proposition, future for you. And that can happen on the collective level and the individual level. And so when you then are hurt, that's, like I said, ouch, that's sort of bad enough. Damn, this is not just a nice world out here. That's hard to take, right? It's hard to take as a being when you come out of the womb, which is a nice room.
The nicest place you've ever been, probably.
In the dark. And so the problem is, here we go, you start getting hurt, bad enough, but when then those that hurt you actually prevent you from healing, you cry, and I'll give you something to cry about, sort of the classic oppressive coping culture. That comes from a coping culture, not a healing culture. Otherwise, and when I watch other animal species, I watch them get hurt. I watch an animal bite in the wild, bite another one or chase them. And then as soon as they get a little enough distance, the one that got chased goes into a huge reaction, shakes his wings or his body, spins around, and then it carries on.
That's all.
You have to go through a healing, self-regulating process when you're distressed. That's built in. That's the goodness. And so once you start forgetting how to heal, and that really is then hooked to this next concept, which we have to pay a lot of attention to today, is you can't heal when people don't have the attention to give you to heal.
Yeah.
Unconditional, regarding, loving attention. They don't have it. They're short. They're on deficit themselves. So they cannot provide that holding space, right, for the healing to actually evolve without being judged, without being interrupted, or, here, I'll give you a nice king call if you shut up and, let's get on with it.
Yeah.
So fast-paced societies build off of coping cultures. Fast-paced societies are everybody's trying to grab attention.
Yeah.
And now we're in a competition for attention. While advertising industries, government, everybody, teachers, we have attention deficit disorders and blah, 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 blah. So attention is so fundamental to understanding the fear problem.
It is so crucial. I began to realize this as I finally got enough for myself and had, and I could share with other people ideally and try to maybe help. And how many people seem to desperately need or want my attention. And I just realized, like, this is the thing that has been missing from most people's lives. Like you said, that loving, caring presence of attention that is unbroken and just can hold until it's done. Like, okay, cool. And now we can all move on. Nobody got that. And so this was this, like, valuable resource. But if not everyone has enough of it to begin with, how do we ever get to the point where we have enough of it just for ourselves, let alone to share with other people? Where do we get it? And for me, I think a lot of times I did find it from other people. Luckily, I found people along the way who did have some to give and were loving, and that kept me going, right? It was my little dose to keep me hooked. But I think I went within, right? And I started finding it from this spiritual source, and thank God that exists, I guess. But I don't think everyone believes that, has that, wants to go that direction. Or so what is your answer to, how do we fix that we don't have enough right now in the world in general of this loving presence and ability to share and give attention and care?
We have a huge conflict, as you know, the pandemic. Really, a pandemic of fear. It's a pandemic of conflict. It's a pandemic of violence, of domination,
division,
right? The other, all the othering. We're in a massive pool, massive tsunami of this. Where do you get unconditional in that sphere of competition for, right? And dominance, fear of being hurt, fear of somebody's going to threat. So we're in a huge threat reaction, and arguably, as Thoreau says, we're all hypnotized.
Yeah.
We're actually hypnotized by the threat, not just the details of it, right? The particular color of it, or the identity of that, or the nation of that. All the media love to cover all of those things, those labels, those categories. The conflict is really a conflict between, in some sense, you can hear, what do we believe in? Well, if you believe in that, I don't. Well, you've got to go one way or another. We can't be neighbors. Well, okay, maybe I'll tolerate until you really screw up and then drop the bombs. Toleration is not going to be the answer either. I'm kind of going back to what I would want people to have a conversation about is, okay, we can talk about what we don't believe is together, have those conflicts, whatever. And then all I want, let's give 50% of the time to what we disagree about, what we believe, or even just express what you believe. And then I would always want to bring in the philosophical question. And even here, it's a psychological question. It's a healing. And I would just basically go, do you believe in healing?
In healing?
Add that 50% of the time to all the conflicts that are out there.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, let's put that again. Now we're just going to have another conversation for 50% of the time that we're together. Maybe we're only together for a minute with you or whoever. And then, let's just have a conflict about our beliefs. But let's limit it a bit. So it's kind of a limiting constraint that can be very enabling.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still a constraint, still enabling, just like we have to have certain constraints. We can't ride cars all over and not have some constraints. People bump in all over the place. So enabling constraint would be just continue the conversation with, let's talk about our belief in healing. I don't have to talk about God. I don't have to talk about your God or your goddess or whatever. Let's just limit some of it to talking about, do we believe in healing? And why wouldn't we, or why would we? I think humanity would just rise in awareness and consciousness. And it would contradict the coping society.
Yeah.
Because most of that other stuff is the coping.
Yeah. I mean, on every level. I mean, like the media we get, the pharmaceuticals we take, the methods we use, anything, it's all just coping, actually. People even call it copium, right? That's a thing that people are saying, copium.
That's a nice term. Yeah, copium.
I've never thought about it that way, but it's definitely seems to be what we're doing, just to keep going, but never actually deal with the root issue or the root cause, or where we might want to go, intentionally, instead of just out of reactivity and need and fear and rushing and all of this, but consciously.
And then that curiosity about healing, I could easily say, well, what do we believe about fear? There's a great conversation too. And we just, again, give it some constraint, but that's the topic. And just go with that. And I, what I've learned, summary is, I've learned, because I've read so much and viewed so many videos and so on. I'm a massive studier of fear and how we talk about fear. I am very interested in how we talk about fear and the importance of language constructions within linguistic shapings, imaginings, how we imagine fear. And that is how we teach fear. So that's really, Lindsey, what I'm about. Is I'm an educator in that sense. I'm interested in how we educate about fear. That's so much more important to me than the fears, the managing, the coping with, the healing. That's great. But if we don't understand how we're educated, that calls, where did my education come on my sex, my understanding of sex? Well, how did it come, my understanding of fear, my understanding of healing, hurting? You can see such a basic vocabulary, and I'm just basically saying, I do not know any curriculum in the world, in any education system. I may be wrong, but I do not know them. I've looked a lot. I do not see that in the curriculum.
No.
We have a curriculum everywhere that is so missing of these most basic aspects of the human condition.
Yeah. So what would it look like to start teaching fearlessness and having this society of fearlessness and, asking the questions like, do you believe in healing, and labeling the cigarettes with get to know nicotine, right? Like, what would that start to look like for us? Because right now I think it is so foreign.
It's
But
very
I liked your point too that people respond to it because people would love to, I think, move into curiosity and out of fear, into hope and out of cope, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, unfortunately, you just mentioned hope and cope together, and unfortunately, hope is turned into another copium.
I know. I feel the same. In fact, I said something to someone once, something like, I'm hopeful, and they were like, no, like never be hopeful. 'Cause hopeful makes you incapacitated. Like it takes away your drive to do things for yourself. I'm like, not me. I guess that's true of some people. I just mean I hope things turn out well. I recognize I don't control everything. I will control what I can, and the rest I just hope it's good. Right? Like
I
that's what
do
I
too.
mean.
I mean, I do too. So I can, and again, here's that schizoidal part. I have to
Yeah.
talk like in two world languages.
Right.
What I call the world of the coping, the oppressive societies, language and discoursing, and then there's some more emancipatory, liberational, fearlessness-based perspective. So I'm like a little bit schizophrenic, and that's really hard for people to follow me because they want to.
I understand it. Maybe that's.
I'm glad you understand it. So one of the most fundamental sort of quick theses that came early when I started studying fear and fearlessness, and now I'm going to say, disclose, I do not study fear without studying fearlessness. I'm not interested. I will not do it. It would be the wrong track. And so fearlessness is a really just as important concept. As you can see, it's got the word fear in it. The problem with love and hope and all this good stuff, it doesn't have the word fear in it.
And it becomes like a toxic avoidance for people almost. They're like, oh, just love. Don't even look at that. Don't even think about it. That's not even real. And it's like, well, no, I mean, it's right there. It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's like trying to go to the light without knowing there's the dark anymore.
Yeah.
It's just a split, another dissociation. I see why you want to go there. I see why you want to have ice cream after you're hurt if there's nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have something that feels pleasurable, that's hopeful, that's fun, entertaining, right? Takes you out of those signals, the pain, the trauma. So I came up with this, just a real basic thesis, useful for, I think, investigation. I can't say it actually works and is not recommended or anything, but as part of my investigation, I am out to replace the word hope, the concept of hope, with fearlessness.
I like that.
And I think we would be on a whole different track in actually gaining some really creative, fresh, new thinking in understanding this defense intelligence systems that are going on. And because hope is sold as much as fear is sold for manipulation. And that's been going on a long time, millennia.
That's a really good point. Yeah. What else do you want to tell us about fearlessness?
Yeah, so fearlessness, it's kind of cute. I'll just go over to my little library. One of my latest books.
Aha.
So after studying fearlessness for over 3 decades and trying to talk to people in the West particularly, I find the people in the East much more interested in the notion of fearlessness. And I started finding out why they're interested in fearlessness. Why is the West not interested in fearlessness? You will not find the word fearlessness in the Bible. In those Abrahamic Middle Eastern religious traditions, which have heavily influenced the West. You go into the East, and let's just go into, for example, into Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and their really early teaching parts and core parts. They have a notion, translated, albeit to English, but I've had people from the East in those languages say, well, that's an accurate translation. The gift of fearlessness cultures. They actually have a notion of a culture that operates on the gift of fearlessness. In other words, I come to you, I meet you. And, you think of namaste and some of those great practices, the divine in me greets the divine in you. Okay, that's good, but that's not quite enough to me. It's like, but I also am here, I come to you, giving that same signal. You think of a parent to a child. You could give that same signal. It may be verbal, it may be nonverbal. I just am giving you a very coarse and gross estimation of what this actually means to promote a gift of fearlessness culture. First of all, it's a gift culture, not an exchange culture. You do this for me, I'll do this for you. That costs how much, I'll pay you, and then I go and I don't care about you. That's not a gift culture. The gift, ancient gift culture, and we see it in that philosophies of those particular Eastern religions, is that, I'm sure you'd find it in other, probably Afrocentric Yoruba traditions. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure you'd see it. You see it in indigenous traditions. My friend Ferraro says, well, we're much more a fearlessness culture. So he validates, and I go, okay, you're the scholar. I'm not the scholar in indigenous cultures. And so they then have this notion, I come to you in fearlessness. That's the message you give. And it comes in your look, it comes in your presence. What does it mean? It means I will come to you knowing that you might be in fear someday. Could be right now. It could be in a moment, right? Anything could happen. Bee comes, stings you in the back of the neck. Ah! I'm dying, right? Or whatever. And the gift of fearlessness is I be there with you without encouraging or increasing the amount of fear that you are going to experience. I bring fearlessness to the best of my ability.
Right.
Not a saint, maybe, but the intention of a whole culture built on that. And I went, that's it. That's a culture of fearlessness. Thank you very much. I mean, it has root, but I'm not saying they're practicing it all that well either today. They're very secularized, they're westernized, capitalized, all these cultures so much. So I wrote this book just in the last few years because it's a really thick book. And the reason it was with a friend, Maria Kumar, again, someone from India, interestingly enough, who gets it, right? He goes, oh, I get that tradition from India. A Westerner, not so much, other than bravado. The West loves bravado and bravery, courage. Let's slam them down with the sword kind of bravery, where in this hyper masculinized, etc. So you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure your audience knows. But I wrote this book because I said the nuance, the subtlety of how the Western world, and this is mostly the Western world I'm speaking to, this is where I've come from, Canada and North America. And I am so interested in the nuance of how we resist fearlessness. So I didn't want to study fear directly. You see what I'm saying? I've got books on that, studying fear a little bit more directly. But I said, well, why don't you write a book on the nuances of what you've learned, doing research and writing, not just my words, of how we resist fearlessness. We resist this gift of fearlessness culture. And that's a resistance to the human culture. You could, just use all those analogies we've talked about today. Wonderful to talk to you and see, you're so open to receiving these ideas. Look up the word fearlessness in a psychological textbook.
Okay.
In the West, or a website. Oh, fearlessness, a pathology of someone who doesn't have a fear response naturally.
Oh, wow. Oh, almost like people who can't feel when they're being burned or something, but this is an emotional, they lack it.
And found in criminal behavior.
Wow.
Narcissism.
Wow. Fearlessness
is pathologized systematically by our institutions of psychology. That tells you where we're at.
Yeah.
And you compare again to a perspective from the ancient East, right? And then you can hear modern science, modern Western philosophies, the dominant worldview, control, disorders of psychological this or that, and pathologizing. So fearlessness has got a huge struggle. That's what that book's about. Playfully as well as in deadly seriously. You hear me giggle and laugh today. I think that comes from I've just come on this path of so much healing my work myself and so much knowledge and wisdom and begin to realize, oh, it's so small. I'm so humble. I'm so stupid still.
Yeah.
I feel like I know so little. So I have to come into the absurdity of I'm 71 years old and this is where you're at. You're trying to teach people about fear and fearlessness. Like, that's your career? I mean, you gotta just live in absurdity. This is ridiculous, and I don't get paid for it.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You don't have a house. Okay.
It's the passion. It's the passion. This is, I think, what keeps us going, honestly. It's the reason if we survive that we will survive. And I think also if we're going to like talk about the, the they, the them, the controllers, the people who would love to control the whole world or whatever, they don't bank on people doing free work because of their passion, right? They can't even understand it, honestly, because it's not transactional, right? And it's not about power or domination or control or acquiring or anything else. It's like purely internal. And I don't think that it's understood on that level. So I feel like that's the type of deep inner connection and being and healing and presence and wellness that is actually the antidote. It makes sense to me. I wish you were showered with abundance and wealth.
I have my wealth. I have my wealth in certain ways for sure, and your showering is well welcomed for sure.
I'm glad. Well, I would love for you to tell us the name of the book again and tell people where they can get it. I would love if you wanted to share any sites or any things that you want to share with people where they can go and find more from you and connect more deeply with you. I know you have so much out there. If you have events or just anything else you want to invite people to. The World's Fearlessness Teachings.
That was my first book in 2010. 15 books in between to get to this resistance to fearlessness. So you can see I'm still on it, trying to come at it in different angles. So that first book, The World's Fearlessness Teachings, is I just looked at who are our teachers of fearlessness that have been on the planet across different generations and cultures and history and time. And what do they tell us about fear management? And the book is sets out a theory of fear management for the 21st century, kind of, big bravado, kind of inflated big idea, but I'm a big thinker. Not that I think we'll get there necessarily, but I did lay out a theory of fear management that no one else has, that I know of, has done so in that kind of way, evolutionary wise. And then the other book, Resistance of Fearlessness, again, that's a good start, but that's not for everybody. So I say, okay, you're not a reader that way. You're not trying to be a scholar in this world. That's fine. I'll talk to those people. So then I do a blog. So I have a Ning. So it's a community, online community. It's called the Fearlessness Movement.
I love that.
Yeah. So you look up Fearlessness Movement quotes. You can put my name in there, or just Fearlessness Movement Ning, Ning, which is just a platform, right, for online community. And that gives you a chance to see my latest sort of blobs and thinking that I drop into it. People then can come on and you get a free blog when you come there. There's no paying or no membership. And what I'm trying to get really is that idea is that fearlessness is not a thing. It is a movement that has been around since the beginning of time. When fear appeared, so then did fearlessness. That's the dictum. That's the underlying philosophy. That can be challenged. We need to research that. Is that really true? But I think it's true. If you want to prove it or not, I'm not probably going to put my time into that. But so what would it be like to build a community based on we're promoting a fearlessness movement, which is no different than we're promoting a liberation movement, we're promoting a peace movement. I just don't think those things, like we're promoting peace, we're promoting love, I do not personally think, from a researcher's point of view, best perspective I can come to it, I don't think those are going to be the antidote. I think when we get fear and fearlessness worked out, in this, how they're related to a coping and a healing paradigm, we will make great progress in undermining the worst. Will we save ourselves, right? Too late, too little, too late. You just really can't operate from that. I come to a really simple philosophy. I call it philosophical disability. As a philosopher, I have a disability, and I want other people to realize they have a disability as philosophers and thinkers and theorists. I don't want to say anything really too much in predicting the future of the world unless I've got a 10-year-old sitting in front of me looking at me while I'm saying it.
Yeah. Right.
That's a true thing. That is a true thing. Do you really want to say that? Do you really want to think that in public space, even if that's public with another one human? And so I put this imaginary 10-year-old in front of me, and I say, okay, so what do I really want to communicate?
That is a great practice in and of itself. I think I could learn tons from putting the imaginary 10-year-old in front of me all the time.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Well, I love that, that fearlessness has the ability to perhaps trump that, the peace movement, the love movement, all those things, because it at least acknowledges the shadow, and it is there, and that we do need to, and that we can actually heal, and we can have space and time for that, and do it in appropriate ways and move beyond the fear together, even if one of us is lost in it in the moment. So it feels right to me. It feels like it could be the most successful thing. I also love that you have that community. I imagine, like you said, there is no curriculum for fearlessness that you know of, or for fear studies that you know of. But I'm sure there's a lot of parents out there listening to this that are like, I want to encourage my children, to move towards fearlessness and not be stuck in this cycle and this programming and this trauma and all of this. And probably in that community, I imagine there's other parents and people who are sharing kind of ideas and things about how you can think about it and how you can start to implement some of it. And your books, I think, probably go a great deal towards that as well when people go check those out.
Yeah, someday I'll try to write a real simple book about fear. I just can't do it.
You're just deep in the philosophy and the science and the research of it.
And really, I think a lot of deep thinkers will come to that and they go, okay, well, somebody else take my work and write that simple book.
Yeah, you do that part. Funnel it all down for me.
I would be glad to consult with you and help you write that book.
Yeah. I know you already gave us such nice thoughts to consider and reflect on, but if you had a final thought or message, what would you share with people tonight?
Just ask yourself, what do I know about fear? I'll just stay with the topic, and of course, fearlessness is right there. But let's just say, what do I know about fear, and who taught me? List that out really carefully. And then go, like usually most of us say, we may have read one book on fear, how to cope with fear, or how to conquer fear. And then I go, well, there's 10,000 books on fear. They actually are out there. But are you willing to take that next step and go, well, maybe that's just one perspective. That's what I'd like to share.
Love it. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the fearless Dr. Michael R. Fisher. Michael, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Lindsay.
Well, in the end, there is only one fear that takes many forms and guises, and it is the fear of suffering and perhaps death. But what a silly waste. You know with absolute certainty that you will suffer in ways minor and large, and that you will die. And the sooner you come to peace with these facts and begin to focus on what you'd like to accomplish, experience, and create outside of the fear of suffering and death, the sooner you will create a life worth living, a life free from outside manipulations, and a life of deep meaning for you and all whose lives you touch, until you release your fear so completely that you only move in energies of trust, love, and confidence. Travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Pop the lid of that doja, hot box a bridge enclosure. She's only as gold as he grows her. This I'm already know, sir. Rock the line, these posers. Momentum swings us closer. Readjust the motor. Run a diesel, it's colder than solar. Lift off on these bitches off. Buttermilk's spineless life forms. I'll leave on the light form. Watch and observe the hive swarm. Shit, my mind's torn. Speaking in patterns of rhythm. Gaia's metronome ticks. All of the atoms up within him. Smashing at a different vibration towards the wisest location. Not even sure if there's occupation or if they'll embrace him. Brought some tasty lacings to share.
if there's any. Prepare for reincarnation in spite of the friendlies floating the wind. Been the glow to the gin. Finally formed a bridge between the watchers and the men. All of the fodder of sin dissipates on the landing. Are these fuckers ready to ingest the Yeti's endless ranting?
Placed by the ancients with man-made technology. Last of my breed, a living prodigy. I'm in the atmosphere and not space. It would burn your flesh to see my face. Fueled by the elements, 115